Welcome to Inside the Studio. I'm Evan Sanford. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm very excited for the show we have for you. My special guest is political advisor Jim Messina. He was President Obama's Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations from 2009 until 2011. Jim was instrumental in passing the Affordable Care Act and was honored by the American Association of Political Consultants as Campaign Strategist of the Year. It's a pleasure to welcome Jim Messina to the program. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure, Evan. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. First, why do you think the American public has connected so much with President Obama, your former boss?
I think a couple reasons. One, if you look at the people who have won the presidency in the past 20 years, Bush, Obama, Clinton, they're all people who understood who they were. Barack Obama is the epitome of the American dream. He is the guy who grew up poor and became president of the United States. And throughout both campaigns, the thing he had going for him was people trusted him because he knew who he was. People believed he was honest and in it for them. And the fact that they got to watch his kids grow up and to kind of watch the evolution of him has been a story that you and I will tell our grandkids.
What is he like behind the scenes?
An even better guy. You know, I've worked for 50 politicians, and the truth is when you get to know people, you know their flaws. The more I got to know Barack Obama, the more I respected him. So much so that when I fell in love with my wife, now wife, I was in the White House, and we were going to go on our third date, and he wanted me to travel with him, and someone said to him, "Oh, he's fallen in love, he has his date." He called up my date, now wife, and invited her on Air Force One, took her on a trip with us. At the end, gave her a whole tour, walked her down the steps in front of the National Press Corps, put her in the car, and leaned over to me and whispered, "Anything else I can do to help?" And I was like, "Nope, that should do it." That's the kind of guy he is. On election night in 2012, when the networks had called him the winner, and he kept saying, "Not until Jim tells me, not until Jim tells me," because as you know, they told Bush twice that he lost. They told Kerry he'd won. He wanted to hear it from his campaign manager. So the Secret Service came and grabbed me and raced me through the crowds to his suite. And I said, "Congratulations, Mr. President. You've been reelected President of the United States of America." And I started crying. And he leaned over. And in that moment where he had been reelected President of the United States, only the second person since Roosevelt to win both times with 50%, you know what he said to me? "Now ask her to marry you." Like he was thinking about me that moment, not him, which I think says the kind of person that he is. I will always be incredibly grateful for the chance he gave me.
What do you think was the most important factor in running such a successful campaign?
Barack Obama. I run campaigns all over the world, and the fact is, in the end, everything, we ran a very smart campaign. We did technology, we did data and a bunch of things. But in the end, the most important thing is who's on the ballot. People believed in him. 10 times the amount of people volunteered for his campaign than volunteered 4 years before. And that was because of him. Now, we did some very smart things. We invested in young people. A very smart advisor of ours, Eric Schmidt, who was the chairman of Goodall, said to me, "Don't hire anyone who's ever worked in politics before." And so we hired a bunch of young people who were brilliant young students who ended up changing politics because they weren't part of the system. And I think that was really smart. I think it was also smart not to run either campaign from Washington. We did them both from Chicago to get away from the Beltway bullshit and just focus every day on building a new kind of campaign. And then 3, we got pretty lucky to have a pretty bad opponent.
Well, let's talk about technology and how you use that to your advantage.
Yeah, so very early on, we decided that technology was going to be the game changer for us. The president was, the president under the worst economic conditions in 50 years. We were being outspent by the opposition. And so we decided to use technology to see if we could get rid of the space between the president and voters. So very early on, I did this grand tour all over the world, and I went and interviewed every kind of smart technology person I could get my hands on. I sat with Bill Gates. I sat with Eric Schmidt and the Google boys. I sat with Steve Jobs of Apple on his deathbed. And I remember right before Steve died, he was giving me advice about how to run a campaign. He said, "Look, do you know what 2 things people have with them all day, every day? What they're thinking about, what kind of makes their day? And I said, I think so. And he goes, what, Jim? And I said, sex and money. And he goes, no. The 2 things that bring everyone together are religion and the cell phone. And he goes, you can't do anything about religion, but if you run a campaign that uses the cell phone, which in 2011, 2012, no one had ever done, and use that to organize, put people's message on that, get people to organize their friends, all on this thing, you'll run a campaign that will be relevant. And so we did that. No one had ever done it. And so that kind of technology allowed us to change the way people communicated. And then we built, for the first time ever, very sophisticated models of the behavior of the American electorate. We rated every voter in America from 1 to 100 on 3 things. Whether or not you support Barack Obama, not very hard. Whether or not you're going to vote, harder but doable. But for the first time in American history, whether or not you were truly undecided between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. America is now the most partisan country in the world. Only about 8% of voters were undecided between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. And our job was to figure out who those 8% were and beat the shit out of them until they voted for us. And so we use technology to do that.
Well, let's talk about this campaign, 2016. In your opinion, what do you think the Clinton campaign, where do you think they fell short, where you succeeded?
I think it's hard. It was bizarre for me because I was watching the race. I now run international campaigns, and I was having to watch the race from Europe. And it was a very, very different kind of campaign than the campaign we ran. And everyone wants to hammer on that campaign and criticize it. I think a couple things. One, she got 3 million more votes than her opponent did. 2, she ran the first general election candidate for a female nominee. And 3, everybody thought she was going to win, including Donald Trump, who didn't write a victory statement because he'd been told he was going to lose. So I don't want to hammer too much on it. I do think that people would always say to me, what do you think of the campaign? What do you think of the campaign? And I was sitting in Europe for most of it. And so I kept saying, look, I don't know. The thing that makes me nervous was every 10 days or 2 weeks during the 2012 race, the smartest political operative in the world would call me up at 2 o'clock in the morning, which at the time was incredibly annoying. But he would give me the best advice. And that political operative was Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton would say to me during the Obama race, Jim, all presidential elections around the world are always about one thing and one thing only. And that is the definition of people's economic future. And if you figure out how to explain to people where you're going to take their economy, where you're going to take their jobs, you will win that election. And in our race against Romney, we never forgot that. I couldn't tell you in 2016 what either one of them would do for people's economic future. And I think that in the end, in the Midwest, in states no one expected him to win, that is why he won.
Before you were campaign manager, what were your duties as White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations?
It will be the greatest job I've ever had. Under my offices were the offices of legislation, politics, Secret Service, White House operations, a bunch of other things I'm sure I'm not thinking about. But mostly what I did all day was worry about getting his legislative agenda through. So I ran the war room for the health care bill, which was the most difficult 14 months of my life, way harder than the campaign. I ran the campaign to pass Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and do those sorts of things. And just to get to be with him every day through the good parts and bad parts, 5 times during the healthcare debate, Rahm Emanuel and I went into the Oval Office of the President and told the President that healthcare was dead. And 5 times he said to us, put everyone in a room and I'll fix it again, including the last time, the morning after we lost Ted Kennedy's Senate seat after he died, and we lost a special election that nobody saw coming. And the headline in the New York Times was "Healthcare Bill Dead After Kennedy's Seat." And I remember walking in and saying, "Mr. President, it's over." And I remember the only time I've ever seen him get physically angry, he picked up his chair and kind of put it down strongly and goes, "Jim, I've told you this before. Put everyone in a room and I'll fix it again. We're going to pass healthcare." And Rahm looked at me, and Rahm's like, "Tell him it's not going to happen." And I'm like, "Mr. President, the votes just aren't there." And he looked at me and said, I gave you an order, now go do it. And 27 days later, the healthcare bill was signed into law.
That's a perfect transition into the next question, which is how do you feel about Trump's plan to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act? Do you think there is room for improvement? Absolutely,
there's room for improvement. Look, I negotiated the thing, and it's 2,300 pages. And the fact is, you're changing 19% of the economy. So the history of all big pieces of legislation, Social Security, Medicare, highway bill, are always that you've got to continue to learn. There's no law that gets passed that 200 years later is the same law. Things change, and there's things that we got wrong and things we got right. And it needs to be amended. As to how I feel about the fact that it could be repealed, I guess the best word would be fucking furious. I think it's ridiculous. I think 19 million Americans have health insurance. I think healthcare is now growing slower, healthcare expenses growing slower than any time since the Great Depression. We finally have a system people understand. 67 million Americans, like my wife, who have pre-existing conditions can now get healthcare. All of those things are huge improvements. Are there things that need to be changed? Of course. There's things that need to be changed about my outfit. Doesn't mean I'm going to take my clothes off. It just means we're all going to get smart people into a room. This weekend outside of LA, I spoke at a patient safety summit. And it's a bunch of doctors and hospitals and victims who are all trying to make sure that medical errors in hospitals don't happen. And one family after another got on stage and told the story about how the American Affordable Care Act saved their kid's life. And we shouldn't let politics drive everything. Look, I'm the biggest political hack you're ever going to meet, right? I love politics. But I don't think that politics should drive healthcare decisions. I don't think politics should drive economic decisions. Politics should drive politics. And we got to worry about policy. And so if there's things we can do to make that bill better, have at it. But to say we're going to rip it apart without a replacement is just like saying you're going to tear down a road without a new road first. It's just crazy. I'm hoping that wiser heads are going to prevail, but it does not seem like wiser heads are currently running Washington.
Well, just stick around for just a second. We'll be right back with more Inside the Studio right after this. Welcome back to Inside the Studio. We're talking with political advisor Jim Messina, and with all the talk about the impact of the Supreme Court, let's talk about the very latest developments. Jonathan Turley wrote a recent article in the LA Times where he argues for changes in the court instead of changes on the court, and basically against too few having too much power. Would our judiciary be better off with a larger number of justices?
It's a great question. I read Turley's piece. I'd never thought about it before. I was involved in two fights to get both of President Obama's appointments to the court. As a non-lawyer, I didn't fully understand both how much power a Supreme Court justice has and how political those appointments are. But I think what is clear is our judiciary is suffering from real overload. And there's a bunch of issues that are coming in front of it that are challenging the judiciary. And I think Turley's piece is an important point to have a real discussion about the future of our judiciary. And I think it's a helpful thing. I don't want to fully endorse his opinions because I haven't thought about it enough. But as you look about the fight we're about to have in the Supreme Court, clearly something's not right.
How do you think Citizens United positively or negatively impacted the campaign that you ran in 2012? Do you think it should be overturned, and why?
Citizens United in my lifetime will be known as the single worst Supreme Court decision in American history during at least the last 25 years. Let me give you an example. In 2004, when John Kerry and George Bush ran against each other, they each spent about $80 million. 8 years later, post-Citizens United, Barack Obama spent $1.1 billion and Mitt Romney spent about $1 billion. That financial system, which clearly I was a part of, I raised $1 billion for the Obama campaign, but that financial system will continue to be corrosive to our democracy. I also, as you know, do international campaigns. I helped David Cameron get reelected in 2015 as the Prime Minister of the UK. They could spend, I think, £23 million total. No paid television ads, no paid radio ads. They had higher voter turnout, higher voter interest in the election. I'm not sure showing you, Evan, 100 negative TV ads really is adding to your knowledge about this campaign. I think it is absolutely imperative to have some amount of campaign finance regulation to stop what is unbelievable. Last election cycle, one family spent $800 million of their own money to influence the American elections. If that happened in any other country, America would criticize it and say the oligarchs are trying to buy the election or the government's trying to buy the election. The fact that it happened here, I think, is a scandal and an outrage. And it was a scandal when I used the system to win an election. It was a scandal when we lost an election. It's just wrong for the country.
I'd be interested to know your thoughts on what happened to Merrick Garland. How should Senate Democrats respond? Is filibustering Trump's pick, Neil Gorsuch, a smart idea?
It is a really great question. First of all, the filibustering of Merrick Garland was unprecedented in American history. Democrats had let Republicans have judicial nominations even to the United States Supreme Court in the final 2 years of an administration. Barack Obama won that election fair and square, and he should have been allowed to appoint his Supreme Court. As to what Democrats should do, I think the most important thing is to give Trump's pick what Obama's pick didn't get, which is a hearing. And ask the questions, ask the tough questions like you're asking me. Have at it, and then make your decision. I don't think Democrats should announce before the hearing that they're going to block this guy. I think our criticism last year was allow the guy a hearing and then vote up or down. Democrats will get that chance to ask tough questions. From what I've seen so far, I have a bunch of questions for this nominee. And so does the country, right? We are, as I talked about earlier, the most partisan country in the world. So there's a lot of people who want this guy and a lot of people who don't. And a lot of people are just trying to figure out what this means for their family. And they want some questions answered, and I hope they get that chance.
What questions would you have for him?
I would ask him a couple things. I would ask him to tell me what his theory is about how you continue to evolve the law in these changing times. Because lots of people, including a couple of his statements, are we had to look at the Constitution and only the Constitution. The problem is 225 years ago, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't TV, there wasn't a whole bunch of things there is now. It has to be a living document. And I want to hear his thoughts about what that means, because you're going to grow up for the next 60 years with his decisions. And that's a thing that you especially, I'm old as the hills and will soon be dead, but you will have a whole long time to live with his decisions. And if I was you, I'd want to know what he thinks about the future.
What is your assessment of the Electoral College when it's already given us two presidents who have lost the popular vote since 2000? And why shouldn't majority rule determine who is the next president?
It is a really great question. I have thought about this one more than many other things. In the end, I'm still wildly conflicted on the Electoral College. And let me tell you why. I think that it is a wonderful part of the country that Barack Obama could go from 3% in the polls to President of the United States because he went to every county in Iowa and every county in New Hampshire and went to people's houses 3 times, and they really got to know him. And he ended up becoming president when no one thought he could win. And if you get rid of the Electoral College, the only places people like me will campaign in are the major media centers. We will go to New York, LA, Chicago, Miami, and just run TV ads there because that's where the votes are. And we will skip over huge sections of this country. That's the downside to getting rid of the Electoral College. The upside to getting rid of the Electoral College is, it makes not a lot of sense that 3 million more people voted for Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump is now the President of the United States. If you don't participate in politics very much, I have an amazingly wonderful 4-year-old nephew, Reed. And Reed called me after the election and said, "But Uncle Jim, he won or she won." And I said, "No, actually she didn't." And he goes, "She got more votes." And I said, "Yeah, let me explain. And it's hard to explain. And there are a lot of people around the world trying to figure it out too.
So why would why would he bring it up? The popular vote that wasn't in his favor, why not just move on?
You're asking me to explain a bunch of crazy behavior that I cannot explain.
Try explaining it like it's your nephew.
It's going to be huge, is what I would say. What I would say to my nephew, and what I tried to say to my nephew, is America really wants all of its states to count. America wants Montana, where I'm from, to count enough that it will matter to go to those places. It was part of what the country tried to do to bring everybody together. And sometimes, including twice in my lifetime, my party has won the popular vote and lost that. And it is mind-numbingly hard, especially because these elections matter, right? We got into an Iraq war because George Bush won the Electoral College. We are now, so far in the first 2.5 weeks of the Trump administration, doing crazy things because of the Electoral College. I just have to remind myself that the framers were pretty smart. And maybe this whole thing's a plan. Maybe.
Well, let's talk about your plan, your personal plan. In 2013, you launched the Messina Group.
Yep.
What can you tell me about the group's purpose and mission?
We have 3 missions. One, to take the learnings of the Obama campaign and run and win foreign campaigns for presidents and prime ministers around the world. And it's been one of the singular highlights of my life to get to participate in politics around the world. And I've learned a ton. Second, we want to help, in my opinion, the most important segment of the future economy of the United States, and that's the tech industry, especially the sharing economy. Companies like Uber, Airbnb, etc., explain their business models to regulators who built rules and regulations before any of these things happened, and help make sure that innovation isn't stifled by regulation. And then 3, we want to have fun. We want to do cool things and have a great time. Barack Obama taught me this amazing thing that's called joy. And he said to me very early, if you love what you do every day, it won't be work. And so we try to do things that make us laugh and have fun. And we're about 30 people. We have offices in London, San Francisco, DC, New York, Texas, and every single day I giggle. So that's a good thing.
You recently spoke at the University of Redlands. What was your message to the students and community in that speech?
2 things. One, political engagement. I don't care if you support Donald Trump. I don't care if you oppose him. We have historically low turnout right now. And people are making decisions every single day that really affect you. And, Evan, I grew up poor on the wrong side of the tracks and got to be the president's deputy chief of staff and campaign manager. That only would have happened in America. And part of my message when I go to college campuses, and this was true of Redlands too, is this place gives you the ability to do whatever you want. If you want to build your own radio and TV station, you can, right? If you want to go to work for Barack Obama, you can. And too often I think people limit themselves and say, oh, I can't change things because the system's broken or whatever. I remember the day Barack Obama offered me a job in his campaign. I called my mom, and my mom said, but honey, you have a job and a girlfriend, and if you get rid of all that, he's not going to win. And I said, Mom, but I believe in him. And she goes, then go right now. And we all have a responsibility to go take a shot. And, nowadays, I know for you guys, you have huge student loans and all those things, and you have choices, right? And I'm just kind of here to say, take the wild choice. Go out and try to change your world.
Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been an
My pleasure,
absolute
Evan.
pleasure
Thanks.
for us. That's all the time we have for the program today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Evan Sanford, and this is Inside the Studio. See you soon.